might get shut off, but hopefully not. But we're about to get another account, so hopefully that won't happen in the future. Good morning. Looks like we have a waiting room. Hey, Matt, can you keep an eye on the waiting room? Because people are in there, but I'm not sure how that got enabled. Great. All right, so I'm going to offer a brief summary of the reading for this last week. If you're working with a text that has uh, paragraph numbers, this would be, I think, roughly around 14 to 25. But for us in the book that we're working with, Matt and I, this one, it was like 80 to 100. So where we left off last time when Karsten gave us a summary was this process of this purification process that Steiner was describing, which is, very akin, as many people recognize, to the different accounts of like purgatory or the bardos. And so where we're at between 14 and 25 paragraphs, or 80 to 100, Steiner starts talking about this as the process of casting off the astral corpse. So there's already been cast off the physical corpse and the etheric corpse with that experience of the whole life tableau unfolding before the deceased person. But this process of the purgatorial purification process is another kind of review that Steiner, I don't think he says it in these pages, but elsewhere, maybe further on in this book, but definitely in other lectures, that this process tends to last like a third of the lifetime. And it consists of, well, first of all, casting off or I guess, yeah, purifying certain cravings that can only be satisfied in the physical world, but that don't actually reflect the nature of the I. And also it consists of, in this life review, re-experiencing in a kind of inversion of not only backwards, but also like spatially, in the sense of we re-experience from the other person's point of view different moments in our lives when we cause someone else suffering, and we're impelled to enact, whether it was like striking someone or something like that, to enact those moments through cravings that weren't actually reflective of the essence of our I. And he doesn't go into that, like what that means exactly in this in these pages, but I just wanted to offer that I think this reflects in what Coleridge thought. Barfield links Coleridge's notion of separative projection to the I, and so that we can only really actualize ourselves as I beings when we both recognize our oneness with other I beings, so like the I thou relationship, but also recognize them as separate or as distinct from us. And so certain actions, like striking someone, don't reflect that truth. And so yeah, in order to kind of come back to ourselves, there's this necessity to, as he describes it, re-experience from the other point of view such actions. And so there's like the way I think about it is like remembering who we are and attaining to a deeper wholeness. And so eventually he says we cross over the gate of birth. So we like go all the way back in this review to the moment of birth, and we on the other side we enter what he calls spirit land, which I think one way we could talk about the spiritual world or spirit land as being the inside of the manifest world. And this wouldn't apply necessarily to this wouldn't be an accurate description maybe for earlier phases of the evolution of consciousness, but I think it is apt for now. And he says that the spiritual environment that we find ourselves in, we can make distinctions. We can make distinctions in it, and we're able to distinguish ourselves from it thanks to this distillate of our life experience that was contained in the etheric life tableau that unfolded before us right after death. And that also that when we return to this spiritual environs, we contribute something that wouldn't be there otherwise, which is this distillate of our experience, and it acts as a kind of like seed that the activity of the beings who compose the spirit world start to work on. And yeah, and also that this quintessence from our life experience, it serves as a kind of inner world for us in the spiritual world, where otherwise we might be without that, lacking any kind of differentiation from this sort of ocean of spiritual beings. And so he also, I'm not going to get into this in detail, but he describes the like overall environment of this of spirit land as like consisting of inversions of the kingdoms of nature that we experience on Earth. So there's like an inversion of what we perceive through the senses as the mineral world, and as well as the life world that is manifest to us in plants and animals, and then as well a kind of atmosphere. And and eventually there's this discovery, after crossing back over the gate of birth, or through that experience of birth, that this whole world is composed of beings that we experience a kind of radical communion with. I meant to share this quote earlier, but this is how Steiner describes the experience that one would have after finishing the life review and crossing over through the gate of birth. He says, "Now, as it were, a world is coming to him into his consciousness from within. It is a spiritual world in which the I is also living between birth and death." So importantly, like this world is already, it's omnipresent even during our life between birth and death. We're just not conscious of it because we're in a physical body, or at least most of us, maybe some people. Here, however, it is veiled in the manifestations of the senses, and only when turning aside from all outward perceptions, the eye becomes aware of itself in the inmost holy of holies of its being in meditation. For example, what otherwise is shrouded in the veils of sense perceptible nature makes itself known directly and in its pristine form. Like to this inner perception of the eye before death, from within outward is the manifestation of the spiritual world in its fullness after death and when the time of purification has been absolved. So there's like the way in which things appear to us is akin to the way in which we perceive our own I, he says, and that also there's a remnant of the astral body that we carry with us after the purification process, which casts off that part of the astral body which consisted of cravings that were, that, as he says, induced by these kind of demonic beings who inspire us to have desires that reflect, that are more spiritual in nature in their stature, I would say, and they're kind of like infinite appetite, and can't be actually fully, their appetite is directed to the physical world, but they could never be fully satisfied in it. And so these cravings are what we're casting out, but our indulgence of them, he says, is like food for these demonic beings. So it's just so interesting that what we might otherwise think of as, our own possession, like these desires or what have you, the various forms of idolatry that our contemporary world encourage us to encourages us to indulge in. They're actually like yeah, the influences, according to Steiner, of other beings. So so yes, crossing over the gate of birth into spirit land, we find ourselves, Steiner says, in this radical communion with not only our beloved who have passed over before us, but also the spiritual beings who generate our various sheaths. So like the beings that are responsible for building up our physical body, our etheric body, and our astral body. And I recently read this great essay by Friedrich Amrine. He was reflecting on Owen Barfield's poetic diction, and he used this image to kind of represent the earlier form of consciousness that experienced everything coming from like the macrocosm rather than like as a kind of possession of the individual soul. And it just really helped me to better understand actually what Steiner means when he says, when we become conscious in spirit land of these beings who are responsible for generating our form, that we're actually always in connection with, even during life on Earth, but unconscious of this depiction of on the outer edges of the circle, like spiritual beings that are kind of raying in their activity to build us up. Yeah, it just clicked for me in a way that it hadn't before. And so these beings, they kind of like Steiner says, they receive us when we become conscious of, I guess, our true nature after that review and that purification process. Um, and they take up this distillate of our life experience, the fruit of our life experience as a kind of seed and start to work on us in a way that's somewhat akin to sleep during the earth life, as Steiner describes it. And they start to like build again the bodily sheaths that are necessary for another incarnation. And eventually, once, so you could think of this whole process as a kind of pendulum swing. So like there's maybe we could just say we begin in spirit land as like a drop of spirit, an I being, and progressively grow an astral body, an ether body, and a physical body, and then like swing into incarnation, and then with death swing out. And there's this progressive reversal where we lose the physical, the etheric, the astral, and then after this life review, the longer one, where we had to re-experience things from the other point of view, the harmful, and not just harmful, but the whole of life. But it's the, I guess, the events or the actions that are not in congruence with our, I guess, essence as I beings in a separative projection, the I-thou relationship, that these actions, that the desire to compensate for these actions and to make whole, yeah, our connection with our, fellow human beings is the driving force for reincarnation. And so that there's that, just as there's a life review after death, there's a preview of the coming life and all the challenges that we'll have the opportunity to meet in order to grow into a deeper wholeness. And then interestingly, and this is what something I find really compelling, I guess, about Steiner's account of reincarnation, is that he says this has not always been the way things are, this process of reincarnation, and that it will not always be the way things are. So that's fascinating. And I feel like it's more resonant for many of us who are kind of, conditioned by evolutionary cosmology. Yeah, it just makes sense. But who knows? And then finally, something he also mentions towards the end of this reading selection that I thought was really interesting is that when we're in the hereafter, as the so-called dead, awaiting our, next incarnation, we're also like with these higher beings working into the earth and reshaping it I guess, according to these lofty intentions. So that's, yeah, very interesting. He says something like, the dead are in the activity of the ray of sunlight and, what have you. So I mean, it actually very resonant with various indigenous perspectives and different traditions around the world who recognize the ongoing presence of the ancestors and such like. But that I'll leave it there and open it up for dialogue. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Ashton. Great summary. There was a question I wanted to raise to the group about the nature of these the beings that are the true nature of our own cravings, and that's kind of harvest the sensual desires of the ego, which are otherwise unnatural and not like just animal instincts. I'm wondering the extent to which these beings of the purging fire, as Steiner refers to them, are in some sense conjured by the human eye's cravings, or whether they pre-exist those cravings, or whether that's not a dichotomy that is helpful to construe this in terms of, but that there's some kind of mutual arising here. Is this is this a because I would like to understand the nature of evil and these demonic beings in a participatory way, which is to say that Steiner grants them some kind of independent existence, but it doesn't seem to be ultimately independent of our own craving, and that the purging fire, as we're purifying our astral bodies after death, seems to release, or say dissolve, or maybe even redeem these demonic beings. But it did also remind me the way he's distinguishing these sorts of cravings that only human beings can have from animal instincts. It reminded me of something that Schelling says in his philosophical investigations into the essence of human freedom, written in 1809, where he's quoting one of his collaborators, Franz Xavier Baader, who he became quite close with when he moved to Munich in 1806 or so. And Schelling quotes Baader. He says, Franz, he says, Baader is right to say, it would be desirable that the corruption in man were only to go as far as his becoming animal. Unfortunately, however, man can stand only below or above animals. In other words, yeah, when human beings succumb to these cravings, it's not like we're just becoming like animals, right? There's something else going on that's unique to the human eye. And so, yeah, this is a question I have. What is the ontological status of these demonic beings, and how much do they depend upon our own participation in the form of these cravings to have that independent existence? And if that they do depend on our cravings, then how independent are they really? Throwing that into the mix. I think Bruce's hand shot up next, so I'll pass it along.
So I'm in a really weird space today. I mean, physical space. Can you hear me? Okay, it's really echoing in here. So what I wanted to say actually addresses Matt's question, but indirectly. And first I wanted to thank Ashton for his great summary, and I'm really happy that you pointed out one thing, which I'll come back to. I also wanted to thank Matt for the summary he sent by email this morning, which I also read, which I thought was very helpful. Ashton was going to, quoted something that I was about to quote when if I had a chance to say something today, and that was about the spiritual, I'll call it the spiritual world being inside of us after death, but also inside of us before death, was my terminology. But it is masked, he said, by the physical appearance. A friend of mine put it this way. He said, the spiritual world is here and we're looking over here. So I think it's very important where we are today to soften our look here so that we can see here. And I remind, as I probably say every time, we are not living in Steiner's time. Steiner's language was very appropriate for his time. It's much more difficult for our time. It's a very objective kind of language. So I want to strengthen what Ashton pointed out and what Steiner says here. And I think that you'll see as you experience this yourself, that it's in many traditions, it's in many of the things that you've already read. And that is that the world is inside of us. The spiritual world is inside of us. Max posted something on his Facebook page a couple of weeks ago about, or something that Steiner wrote very early in his life when he was 17, about discovering this inner nature of the I. And he had stayed up all night, and I can't repeat it. You can look at Max's page on that. So that's the experience I'm talking about. And then for Steiner, that experience of the I blossomed out into what he then wrote about as the experience of the spiritual world. So in that experience of the I, we have everything, really. And I know it doesn't really make sense, but that's okay. That's how spiritual works. It's a bunch of contradictions. So that is the direction to go to find the answer to Matt's question. However, there is a lot of stuff, a lot of interest in anthroposophical circles about these adversarial beings. Some of them are really bad. Steiner hints at it here, really bad. I would not make that the reason that you want to become clairvoyant or to have understanding, because you will meet them. Steiner asked what the reason to become clairvoyant was, or talked about it. And he said something that to me is absolutely has given meaning to my life. And in a way I found myself, and that is to be of service to the world. The only real reason is to be of service to the world. And I think you have to ask yourself, we should always be asking ourselves as we go toward move toward the understanding of those adversarial beings, in what way does this serve the world? That I can explain what those beings are. Is that another avenue for them to enter into the world? And I'm not suggesting this at all for Matt. I'm just saying for some people who do that, it is. Thanks very much. That's what I wanted to say.
Go ahead, Max.
Yeah, so thank you, Bruce, and thank you, Matt, and thank you, Ashton. I'll just follow up quickly with the quote that Bruce had referenced. This is from Rudolf Steiner, 19-year-old science student at the Technical College of Vienna. He writes, on the 13th of January, 1881, 12 o'clock midnight, he's writing to a friend. He says, my dear faithful friend, I did not sleep at all during the night from the 10th to the 11th of January. Up until 12:30, I was occupied with various philosophical problems, then eventually threw myself down on my bed. Last year, my striving had been to investigate whether what Schelling had said was true, that there dwells a secret, wondrous faculty, the German is Geheimes, wunderbares Vermögen, within us, to withdraw from temporal change to an innermost self, divested of everything extraneous, and there to intuit there under the form of immutability, the eternal in us. I believed then, and still believe it now, to have very clearly discovered that inner faculty in myself. I had long sensed it, and now the whole of idealistic philosophy stands before me in an essentially modified form. What is a sleepless night compared to a find like this? I also wanted to pick up on Matt's comment and question, and it basically concerning what is the relation of the human being towards the demons on one side, animals on the other side. I just recently read The Consolation of Philosophy by Boethius. I think he has a very lucid way of phrasing this. He says, the human being towers above the rest of creation so long as it realizes its own free and rational nature. But when it forgets this, the human being sinks lower than the beasts. For other living things, to be ignorant of themselves is natural. For man, it is a deficit. So in other words, human beings are actually falling short of what is possible for them by failing to realize their essential nature, their I, and their power of reason. I'd like to address Matt's question about the nature and the role of demons towards us. Steiner, I think the depiction that he gives harkens for a lot of people to the Catholic doctrine of purgatory. And I think they are more or less talking about the same thing, albeit in somewhat different ways and with somewhat different emphasis. But the notion of purification suggests basically divesting something of everything that is not essential to it, divesting something of everything that's extraneous to it. And that's the way I, at least at this point, have come to understand the experience that we have to go through after life. And it's like the demons arise insofar as we cling to non-essential aspects of our I. We bind our I to these things, and these can be, as Steiner indicates, like attachment or desire, attachment to sensual craving. As Steiner indicates, this is something that can't be fulfilled after death. But these, basically everything, it's like almost like a centrifuge or something, where everything will end up in its proper place. And insofar as we have mixed ourselves in with those things and refuse to relinquish them when the time comes, then we will be dragged down to, I know Steiner doesn't use this word, but basically it's almost easier to convey in the classical Christian Catholic imagery. It's like the demons belong in hell. That's their domain. And insofar as we cling to them, the demons are going to be cast to hell no matter what. The question is whether we will be cast with them. And that's a decision we make. And it consists in how much we bind ourselves to non-essential aspects of us. I think this is Steiner's depiction. Again, it differs in emphasis and some of the imagery from the Catholic conception of purgatory, but you see a very similar depiction in the Bardo state and as portrayed in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, for instance. And this is something I think we don't even have to wait till after life to experience these things. You can experience it moment by moment. To me, at least, as I read this, it's almost self-evident. He's pointing out a feature of your life that maybe we might not notice ordinarily, but once he gives us the concepts and points out what to look for, at least from my side, it seems plain as day. Thank you.
Just a brief remark here, and I'll pass along to Angus. Appreciate what Max has shared and Bruce in response to my question. And it seems to me that, for Steiner, the physical world rightly perceived as an effect of the spiritual world is good and beautiful and true. But when the physical world is imagined to be self-subsistent and understood purely in a materialistic way, that's when and when our cravings for these sensual desires that mean nothing after the death of and the dissolution of the physical body, that's when the physical world becomes sort of animated by these demonic forces, it seems to me. And so I guess part of my question is, what happens when we perceive the physical world aright as the manifestation of the spiritual world? What happens to these demonic beings, right? So yeah. But we'll keep that question open, I suppose, but I'll pass it along to Angus. You're still muted, Angus.
That was a long silent spiel, wasn't it? I was saying thank you to everybody for for like setting the table for so many interesting points of departure. going to reflect firstly on Bruce and then bring around to Boetius and try to, and perhaps this see the world right question that you talked to there, Matt, at the end. Bruce was saying it's like a renewed interest in like the nature of evil, and I find that deeply fascinating. And Ashton, he was referenced in a video by World Astrology Report. You helped the guy who did that. So and there's like 40,000 people that have seen that particular video. No, 50,000 actually now. So there's a real thirst for it, and if you look at people like Gigi Young and these type of people, they're attracting mass audiences because people are really trying to understand like this seemingly from a natural scientist point of view, it's all superstition, but people are saying we don't buy that argument anymore, and it's becoming real and tangible, which is why so many people are creating content and talking about these important issues. So bringing that round to Boetius, that Max talked about, so one of the most important philosophical impulses behind Dante after Aquinas. When Steiner did a series of lectures, I think it might be 214 on the Trinity, where he talks about how the further we go back in time, how, for example, the 7 liberal arts, or the muses, these aren't just inventions of the mind, they were experienced as real beings. And we can select, still in the 6th, 7th century in Europe, you can still pick up traces on that. I think there was a guy called Martin Capesius or Capinus, can't remember the name exactly. But what Steiner is describing in that series of lectures comes very close to this idea, also reinforces this idea that these are real beings that live in us either consciously or unconsciously, and our role as like in developing the conscious of the soul is waking up to the fact of how these beings are living within us. And we're familiar with phrases from Steiner like the world thinks in me, the world feels in me, and the world wills in me. But it's actually there are particulars within that, so that these beings can actually, so they live through their experience we have of them. They actually recognize themselves. They become conscious of themselves, just like we become conscious of what's happening in our mind when we go and build something or that type of thing. So the treatment of them as real beings is it's an essential point, obviously, within anthroposophy. And then to the question of Aaron and Lucifer, the ontology of evil that you were talking to there, Matt. I might be saying something that's obvious to everybody here in this conversation, but I think it is worth reminding, just in case it isn't obvious, that neither Ahriman or Lucifer are 100% evil. There is this idea that they have the role of educating the soul, and the dangers start when we get pulled to one extreme and negating the existence of the other. So becoming purely materialistic in an Ahriman tendency and forgetting the glories of the spirit, or being tempted by the spirit and being totally ungrounded, in one's relationship to life and to thinking and particularly to truth within thinking. And this idea of the ontological status of these beings of Ahriman and Lucifer, I know that I've read on multiple occasions the idea that actually human beings, we are here to redeem Lucifer. So it could be an image that you can play with. That is actually by Luciferic forces working through us, we are part of the redemption of Lucifer, or the Luciferic forces. So as we wake up to our spiritual being as like grounded individuals interested in the truth, that actually has this redeeming quality. It's like within the spiritual realms. One thing I'm less certain of and don't remember having read is whether Ahriman also falls into that category. I'd be really interested to hear if anybody's had any thoughts on that, whether we actually move that to the next planetary state. That's an open question, but I don't remember ever having read anything by Steiner on that particular point. Thanks.
Go ahead, Jeff. Unless Matt, you have something else.
Holy cow, this is really crucial chapter in all of anthroposophy, I would say, or all of spiritual science, as you would say. Just to address that Ahriman thing, Angus, it seems to me that it is our work to redeem that which we refer to as Ahrimanic, but in community, not as individuals. It's far too clever of far too blithe and clever and seemingly Christ-like in its appearances as I see it. But I want to take this slightly different tact, because this has been such an incredible conversation, such richness. I couldn't do justice to everything everybody said, but I think to undergird what people were saying, the picture of this, the crucial picture of this experience in the sense world of the spiritually manifest, at first sort of in a rudimentary sense and developmentally speaking, evolving to a point at which, and this harkens back, I think, to the sort of layers of memory, in that we have an I that plays a finite drama, and we have an I and that I is also playing an infinite drama, and it has memory of both, memory in both, perhaps is a way to put it. And that sensual experience is absolutely necessary to have intimacy with each other, to have intimacy with the world, not abstractly moralize about these things, about desires. Desires are here as will impulses, as potential for who we will be. And he paints that picture here just briefly, but I think it's the very crux of this chapter when he says, when he describes these levels of desire up into a desire, and then on the other side also of the temporal life, the infinite informing our desires to some extent as spiritually manifest beings in the natural world. But then he lays out this very brief picture of the I developing its own desires. And this goes to what Bruce was saying, I think, as service. I believe that the spiritual world desires for us to be intimate with the world so that we can be the eyes and the ears and the sensual experience that the spiritual world cannot have, and that it desires to be in relationship to us as spiritual beings, independent as the spiritual world is. And it is at this place where we can transform these desires, like that are given through the 12 senses, for example, into higher perceptual longings. Say something like Goethe's holy longing comes to mind here, so that when we develop our own freely wrought desires that are unique to the human being, when we move into relationship with the spiritual beings, we have something to contribute to the evolution of existence, let alone the evolution of consciousness. I think I brought that where I wanted to.
Thanks, Jeff, for that. That's wonderful. That I feel like I only sort of emphasized desire in relation to like compensation for the misdeeds, but I just appreciate how you brought out the way in which these potential desires, and even the desires that are, I guess connected to the other aspects of our makeup, according to Steiner, that they're the like creative aspect of like cosmic evolution, and it's not just about um, achieving a kind of uh, full correction, and just going back to heaven eternally. Yeah. Matt, were you going to say something? Looked like no? Cool. Lorenzo?
Hi, hello everybody. Yeah, I wanted to say something about the nature of demons. Uh, Something that is a speculation of mine. I don't know if Steiner actually ever uh, mentions such conjectures. Near the end of the chapter, and I know that we haven't read up to there, but as a spoiler, I will tell you that there is some reference to the role of parents, of natural parents, the fact that even if the reincarnation of the eye is something that happens on a wholly different level, there is not just the physical aspects that are inherited from the parents, but also some anemic aspects, some aspects of the soul. And when we were speaking about demons, I thought that well, all these cravings, they have to do with the soul, or at least the relationship between the spirit and the soul, because they are cravings, but they are cravings different from the ones that animals have. So this should have to do something with the relationship between soul aspects and spiritual aspects. Well, in my experience, what brings real evil that goes beyond what is, let's say, human, is repetition. I mean, this is a classic topic, to do wrong is human, but to persist in doing evil, well, that's devilish. And I think that, yeah, the horrors of addiction, or just psychical neuroses that bring you to repeat the same errors, the same mistakes over and over, like a destiny that is repeating. I think that's very close to the nature of demons. So I have this theory that since we get this double circuit when we look at the incarnation of a human being, there is something that comes from the family, not just physical aspects, but also soul, anemic aspects that come from the family. And also this reincarnation goes through centuries and centuries of the eye that jumps back in without direct relationship to the parents. Well, this, of course, cannot be homogeneous. I mean, there will be, let's say, short circuits. There will be circuits of souls that could repeat, and like the theories of family constellations, that your parents do something wrong to you, and then you grow up and you do the same to your children, and one cannot really escape this kind of short circuits. Well, these short circuits, they could just be inside, the family and the soul level. But when we think about the spirit connecting to it, then there could be something perverse. And so I think that demons are like soul concretions of the short circuits of soul cravings created by the double interleaving of I, reincarnation, and family. I'd like to call it metempsychosis. Usually metempsychosis and reincarnation are thought to be the same, but if we differentiate between the soul and the I, then reincarnation is the I and metempsychosis is something of the soul. And we see that there is the family structure there. We know that the psyche, and I will take in some Freud here and also some psychoanalysis, I mean, We can maybe be critical with some aspects of it, but there are definitely some aspects of our psyche that are determined by the familiar structure. And as I said, the constellations. I think this has a real impact on the development of psychosis, of the stories of serial killers, and when real evil that goes beyond what is thought to be human manifests in real life. So I think, yeah, we should look at them as soul concretions of of vicious circles, let's say, in the reincarnation metempsychosis global process.
Everett?
Oh, thanks. I am very happy to be here today. It's always a pleasure to join you all. And I wanted to take a few minutes just to note a section of the reading for this week, because I think it makes a very important point for us as we move forward. So I know people have different translations, but in my translation, this is begins on page 80 and ends on page 81. Steiner says, imagine the following case. Something happens to a person that arouses in him a feeling of distress. He can take this in two different ways. He can experience distress over the occurrence and yield himself to its disturbing aspects, even perhaps sink into grief. He can, however, take it in another way. He can say, in reality, I have in my past life developed in myself the force which has confronted me with this event. I have, in fact, brought this thing upon myself. And he can arouse in himself all the feelings which can result from such a thought. Naturally, the thought must be experienced with the utmost sincerity and all possible force if he is to have such a result in his life of feeling and inner experience. He goes on and then he says, the thoughts of the first have no actual results. Those of the second, however, have aroused a force, in fact, something actual from its concealment. This is also the case with the thoughts of the human being who imagines that in a former life he has planted within himself the power to encounter an event. This mere thought arouses in him a real force by means of which he can meet the event quite differently from the way he would have met it had he not entertained this thought. As a result, therefore, the necessary nature of this event dawns on him, which otherwise he might have considered merely due to chance. And he will immediately understand that he has had the right thought, for it had the force to disclose to him the facts. If a person repeats such inner processes again and again, they will continue until they become the means of an inner supply of force, and thus prove their truth through their fertility. And this truth becomes by degrees so powerful that such processes have a healthy effect in respect of the spirit, soul, and body. Indeed, in every respect, they have a beneficial effect upon life. The human being is aware that in this way he enters in the right manner into the relationships of life, and that he is on the wrong path when he considers only the one life between birth and death. His soul will become stronger because of this knowledge. So the point that resonates with me in this reading is that the truth of spiritual science is halfly or in part in the doing. Much of its power, its truth, must be lived for it to be known and actually used to become stronger in our lives. And here, Steiner gives us a thought exercise that has the power to unfold the truth in our consciousness in a way that allows us to know without doubt. The truth will speak for itself. We just have to do the practice. And if we really want to know the truth about our spiritual existence after sleep or death, the exercises that Steiner shares for me must also be a part of that equation. And I'm only saying this from my own experience. I think the point is for everyone to draw upon their own experience. And I'm reminded of the way that Karsten did last week when he shared about his dream. And like Bruce did the week before, when he talked about not trying to live up to or duplicate an experience in the same way as others. So Steiner gives us a description. He provides us with powerful images that open doors, doors that he says in the next paragraph that can be opened by each person in their own intimate life. And I think we can all be comforted by that fact, especially as we move into the next chapters where he goes back into the far ancient past, back to the ancient Saturn, sun, moon, and earth existences, and describes worlds that are even harder to visualize than his description of sleep and death. We can be comforted in knowing that every picture he paints for us already exists, that the story he tells us is already written, and it's written in everything around us. It's written in every rock, in every plant, in every person, in every experience we have. It's in reality our story. We are writing it. And just like we will return to earth with the karma we are engraving in our souls in this life, we can engage in not only reading and sharing our thoughts about spiritual realities, but also of doing the work of developing our inner eyes and ears through the many exercises that he gives during the course of this book. And in my opinion, the two absolutely go together. And those are my thoughts today.
Well, this is kind of off topic, but I was thinking about the picture he paints of the mineral world, the physical world being like cavities in the spiritual world, and that the forces that create the physical world are what are perceptible in the spiritual world, what we can see. And so then these cavities within the spiritual world that he mentions, that he points to, then I mean, those are like, I mean, I'm thinking those are like the physical forces, how physical forces manifest in the spiritual world. And then, you know, that they're perceived as a cavity rather than as gravity or magnetism or whatever other forces there are. And then it's so interesting to think of then these forces that are creating our world that we can't see, and then the forces of the physical world that we can't necessarily see, but we see the effects of, and then how that kind of, that boundary appears in the physical world as this cavity or you know. And then I wasn't really thinking this until people started talking about the demonic beings, but then how do they manifest in the spiritual world? Do they not manifest at all in the spiritual world? I mean, we're given a pretty good description of where Lucifer came from in regard to a fallen behind archai, I believe it was, that then enters earth existence and must use the human being to catch up in its development or something along those lines. But you know, it goes back to sort of then, is there this dualistic world, heaven and hell, or how does that work? Everything comes from one. Everything was at one time. I mean, there wasn't a demonic world and then a spiritual world such as the one that we're aspiring to. So yeah, good discussions.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. We're coming to the last couple of minutes here, but just in terms of, your question about the duality, it seems like there's certainly a polarity here, and there's a way in which the spiritual world needs what only human beings on the earth can experience, just as we human beings on the earth between birth and death need what the spiritual world can give us. And there's a mutual harvesting of, loving deeds, not and loving thoughts, but deeds in particular, as Everett was saying, where, as Steiner describes it, it's like the eye after death is planting the harvest of its earthly life like a seed in the soil of the spiritual world, because something is growing there as a result of each human death on the earth. Something is brought across that threshold into the spiritual world. And with each human birth, something is brought from the spirit into the physical. And so there's this mutual transaction and mutual transformation going on that maintains the unity, the original unity, but that without the polarity and the differentiation here, something new couldn't be brought forth out of the evolutionary struggle that's going on. And so it gives a new spin on evil, the nature of these adversaries that provide the resistance, or function as soul educators, as I think Bruce said. And that's a challenging thought, but also quite inspiring, I find, as well. Jeff, I'll give you the last word. Don't forget to unmute.
Thank you, Matt. That was gorgeous. This is you just described beautifully the way in which the Christ as archetype, say, and I don't like that word so much, but symbol, as living symbol, that which represents and also exists and conveys and is conveyed. We are conveyed through, in a certain sense, this moving between individuating as a process in the divide between the finite and the infinite, and we cross that threshold and we go back. And that this is the description of Christ as the Lord of karma, right? As a self that is many selves orchestrating each self, which orchestrates the totality of selves. It's just effing beautiful.
Amen. So just to try and create more coherence, if you have the same translation as us, where the next reading selection is 100 to 120, but if you have this text or one with paragraph numbers, we're reading from chapter 3, paragraph 26 to chapter 4, paragraph 12. But of course, you can read as much as you want. So anyway, thank you all, and see you next week.
Thank you. Bye.